thanks again, Tim, for really interesting findings. Actually, I found this reverse urban heat island in a way encouraging because it shows that with taking some actions, greening or taking other actions like changing the roofing structures, we can actually reduce the heat in urban areas, which are increasingly experiencing that. So that's it. I think really encouraging finding. Thanks for pointing out that. And the apparently I couldn't start the recording before. I'm so sorry. This is really embarrassing for me, but hopefully we can continue now with Dragan. I'll move to you. You also looked at some cities in Serbia. So I will again share my screen and just let me know if you want to move your.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, let's just go to next one. All right, here we go.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to this workshop. And I will present shortly what we did last year for a couple of months. So we got the grant to explore extreme heat impacts in the Republic of Serbia. So you can see Serbia location on this map in red. So it's Southeast Europe, this Western Balkan region. It's not EU, so it's less developed compared to EU countries, and thus it's really in a big need of external funding to do these types of research, and we are grateful for this grant. The purpose of the grant was actually to investigate heat and health conditions in Serbia. In other words, how the heat impacts mortality and hospitalizations in my country. So we had two research questions to deal with. One was about mortality and hospitalization in Serbia connected to the extreme temperatures. And also, it's not just temperature, we wanted to also explore different bioclimate indices and their also impact on the hospitalization and mortality. The special focus was, of course, for this warmer part of the year, so during heat waves period and especially during summer. For the research team, there was 5 of us. You can see 4 pictures here. There is one person additional. So it was, of course, me, colleague Savic, Dunic, and Arsenovic. So it's quite a diverse team. We have geographers, climate people, ecologists, demographers, statisticians, and so on. So it's like diverse team in order to try to understand these connections between temperature and mortality and hospitalization. So we come from the University of Novi Sad. It's the second largest university in my country. Next. So about the context, so this is Serbia, and what did we explore? So we wanted to get the data from official weather network of the Republic. So it's about 47 stations in Serbia. So they are spread across the whole country. And this is the relief of the country. Northern part is plain, southern is mountainous. And most of the stations are actually inside or near the cities. Less of them are on the mountains. In addition to Serbia study, we also wanted to do a study on the city of Novi Sad, where our university is. The reason was we were able to get good data about mortality and hospitalization, really detailed data. So this was also important for us. Other aspect was in the city, as for example, Tim mentioned, it's important to have some measurements. So we have a network of temperature sensors, about 30 locations in the city. So it's quite spread and we have really good data across different neighborhoods, built up types and so on. Next. So yeah, how did the research go? This is a very good question. Yeah, we had certain challenges, or maybe even to say limitations. When we planned, we knew how many stations are there in Serbia for the weather data and climate data, but when we deep dived into it, we saw that from these 47 stations, actually, we could use up to 34 stations. So more than 15 stations was actually lacking data. So it was more than 5%. And we didn't want to use these stations with big gaps in the data. So due to that, we had to restrict our study. Next thing was that detailed hourly data for the climate parameters was actually available only for the largest city in Serbia. So we couldn't get this data for smaller cities, like to have every 7 in the morning, 14 and 21. So also this was one of the challenges that we encountered. Also, mortality data in Serbia is easier to get, but hospitalization data in my country, it's very hard to obtain. So we could get it for Novi Sad, that's why we focused on it. But for the other city, we could not get this detailed hospitalization data for each day. I don't know what's the situation in other countries, but in Serbia, still this data is, you have to contact the institution, health institution, and, there is a procedure for that. Okay, for the findings, so we have a few to show. The first one, okay. We did two reports for the public. It was climate report and bioclimate report for the last more than 20 years. So we investigated temperature, humidity, wind, cloudiness, and bioclimate indices such as PET, UTCI, and so on. So these two reports and one paper that we sent to International Journal of Biometeorology, it was related to long and short-term biomet conditions in my country. We noticed substantial increase in temperature in Serbia, but also substantial increase in the values of thermal comfort indices. Especially, we noticed that extreme heat is becoming more and more frequent and with longer durability inside of our country, throughout the country. So extreme heat is increasing substantially. Next thing. Okay, also in another study that we sent to journal, and we investigated the impact of air temperature with the crude death rate in Serbia, and we noticed that 1% increase in the air temperature is actually in Serbia associated with 2% increase in the crude death rate. So this is one of the main findings of this paper. Next. The next thing, it's quite a big, but it's focused on the Novi Sad, and I will focus on the underlined text. So we investigated the impacts of temperatures, minimum and maximum, on the hospitalization in the urban area of Novi Sad. What we noticed is that the number of hospital admissions, it was increased by about 1% and even a bit more due to a 1 degree increase in maximum temperatures. Also, there was a substantial impact of the minimum temperatures on the hospitalization. So both extremes impacted the increase in hospitalization. Okay, next. Some of the recommendations based on our research. So as I mentioned, we did two reports, 3 papers are under review, and already we hope all of them will be published because it's minor to major review, nothing is rejected. We have created a database that are freely available on the website. We did a workshop for our project also, and all of this is provided online freely to everybody. And actually, this filled one important research gap related to heat and health in Serbia, because up to now, there was not this kind of comprehensive studies for whole the country. So it was usually just one city or few cities. So I would recommend also that all the deliverables, of course, would be freely available for all of our projects. And I hope you also did this up to now and in the future for other projects and grants. Also, the members, you saw them, and also me, we are available to provide our experience, data, skills, whatever is needed to develop these strategies for cooling, health improvement, and so on. And also one of recommendations is to further focus on developing countries, because it's shown that there are substantial research and knowledge gaps in, for example, in Europe, this is Western Balkans, but also we have this sub-Saharan region, also Latin America, Southeast Asia, East Asia. So in this regard, I think the grants should further advance and maybe provide additional resources for this kind of research. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dragan. I think this is one of the first researchers who put such a direct correlation between the increase in temperature and crude death rate. And you also mentioned how difficult it is to find data in smaller cities. And just taking this opportunity, I would like to mention that we also recognize that, and in our work, we decided to focus on secondary, tertiary cities because they often lack that kind of resources. Thanks for mentioning that. It's really interesting research. Before moving on to the next presenter, I want to check if there are any questions in the chat. Okay, so far, I guess not. If If you have questions, please again put it in the chat, and we'll come back to you. Now we are going to move to a little bit more deep dive and look at risk perceptions among certain community groups. One of the very interesting research done by Farzana Yasmin is looking into ready-made German workers in Dhaka, Bangladesh. Farzana, I'm going to share my screen again, and the floor is yours afterwards.
Thank you. Hi guys, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. And so I'm going to present the research on managing heat stress among ready-made garment workers in Dhaka. This is actually a small explorative qualitative study. Yes, we all know that heat has negative impacts on human health and well-being, and the impact of heat exposure has a direct significant impact on workers' health, which creates negative effects on workers' productivity as well. And Bangladesh ready-made garment workers often undergo work stress. So the purpose of my study was to explore how does exposure to heat impact health and productivity among ready-made garment factory workers in Bangladesh, and what are the most feasible options to mitigate this risk. The objective of my research were to characterize the self-reported heat and health impacts on RMG workers. And I also tried to identify the impacts of heat on productivity of these are ready-made garment workers, ready-made garment factory workers. I also tried to analyze the potential feasibility and benefits of this occupational heat stress intervention occupational heat stress intervention measures. And the other part of my research, I tried to identify the barriers of workers in the RMG sector in Bangladesh and accessing cooling options and medical care actually for the extreme heat. Next slide, please. This is our research team. So the School of Medicine and Dentistry. I'm a PhD student over there in Griffith University, Gold Coast, Australia. You can also see International Center for Diarrheal Disease Research. So I'm an assistant scientist there. I'm working there. I'm now in a study leave. ICDRB was our partner for this research. There's also climate groups, National Climate Change Adaptation Research Facility, Griffith University, and also BMT group, Brisbane, Queensland. So yes, this is actually from diverse group of people, from the engineer, clinician, and climate people. Yeah. So next slide, please. I want to give you a context. So a ready-made garment factory, which is a major contributor of Bangladesh country's economy. And industry actually generated like 34.1 billion US dollar for Bangladesh GDP. So this is the major contributor. And Bangladesh has approximately 5,000 RMG factories, and 4 million employees are working over there. And women make up over 60% of these workforce. The working environment, but I must say the working environments of these industries are below standard. I'm saying about most of the factories, not all the factories. And Bangladesh RMG hierarchy establishes class dynamic, like they have managers, supervisors, and workers. And of course, managers and supervisors are all male. And for workers, most of like 60% are women. And for most of the factories, there is no code of conduct for the working condition. And the recruitment policies over there are highly, very informal. immediate dismissal, frequent overtime, and long working hours are really very common here. For job categories like cutting, sewing, ironing, the piecemeal piecemeal jobs they do, and most of these jobs are like the working condition is standing. And I must state that the existing window configurations do not support proper ventilation. Can you please go to the next slide? Yes, for my research, so from evidence, I must say heat has impact on health, heat has impact on productivity, but the influence of heat exposure to health and productivity remains under-examined still for occupational health and safety issues in the ready-made garment industry sector in Bangladesh. So I tried to find out, is there any health and productivity impacts of heat in these RMG workers? And along with these, I must say Western countries have established interventions, but in context of Bangladesh, I try to identify which interventions are feasible. From literature, I find out some interventions, and I also found that lack of research to identify feasible interventions and try to identify utility of interventions to reduce it. Next slide, please. So this is my study settings. I selected two ready-made garment factories in Dhaka, which is the capital of Bangladesh. Next slide, please. So before methodology, I want to share with you some challenges. Among those two garment factories, I found difficulties to entry one of the factories. So I had to conduct my research in separate settings. Like I did my focus group discussions and in-depth interviews of the workers and the key informant of that particular factory in RCDRB meeting room. Okay, this is my the methodology I use for my research. I use focus group discussions, in-depth interviews, and key informant interviews. For focus group discussion, my objective was to gather data on the workers' perception of heat stress and its impact on health and productivity. So I use semi-structured questions. I conducted 4 focus groups discussions in so two each in both factories and of course like from each factory, one male and one female, and like 6 to 7 people in each separated by gender. For ideas, I actually to triangulate multiple data sources, I conducted in-depth interviews. I conducted 8 in-depth interviews, both with male and female. And to know more about how they perceive heat stress, I conducted 15 key informant interviews with factory officials and high-level government officials from Ministry of Labor and Employment, NGO officials, members of BGMEA, and like on-site health professionals as well from the factory, and managers, supervisors. Those are my key informant. Next slide, please. So yeah, as findings, I found that heat is an issue, both from the self-reported data from the workers and from the key informants. They all say that heat has health impact. Heat relate as they stated about some heat related illness symptoms like dizziness, diarrhea, stomach ache, and nausea, even fainting. And they all said yes, it has productivity impact, so their performance deteriorated for heat, and it has impact on like this, like they had to away from work during summer, even absenteeism increased during summer. Yes, and hydration is an issue as well. All of them said. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Hydration is an issue, and they said like they all knows there's high awareness value of hydration, but they cannot they cannot drink more much water because due to their piecemeal, their work quota. Next slide, please. As a perceived barriers of accessing cooling options of extreme heat, they say that yes, they do not face difficulties on the cooling devices to get access the cooling devices they have. They have electrician who turn on the devices. It is the devices they have access, but the workers thought that there are a lack of spaces to set up new cooling devices. Like ceiling fans, if they think about more ceiling fans, they have not enough space. Like personal fan, they have not enough space. Next slide, please. So I asked to the key informants about the feasibility of heat mitigation intervention for like from the literature evidence, which will be like feasible for as in the context of Bangladesh. So key informant identified that installing more cooling devices like ceiling fans would be difficult due to lack of space, and they also prioritize the ventilation system and space cooling, and also mentioned that it is difficult to provide personal fans in RMG factories as they do not have sufficient space to promote this. And they all said air conditioner is not feasible because of expense, high expense. Next slide, please. As available medical care factories, yes, they have provide some medical services and they have dedicated infrastructure, but summertime demand is higher than their facilities actually, and often the on-site infrastructure by a health clinic is insufficient. During summertime, and which we found no additional cooling of the health clinics, and health professionals served important role promoting rest, educate nutrition, even hydration was highly promoted, and the like awareness regarding appropriate clothing also we found as a promotion over there. And demand for beds and absenteeism were higher in summer months. Next slide, please. So as a recommendation, I must say that I want to say that regular hydration and rest breaks should be enforced by management, and work rest hydration protocols must be built into daily schedules. And clothing has impact on heat risk. What can be done, like considering cultural and religious practices along with fabric, fit, and style considerations to minimize heat risk, provide another potential cooling solutions. So yeah, thank you. And thanks for giving me this opportunity. Really great to present my findings in this international platform. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Farzana. This is really, really interesting research. You looked into one specific working space, but I suspect it is probably valid for many, many workplaces, especially in low and middle income countries. The understanding and perceptions of risk and its impact on health, not just on health, which is very important, but also on the economic side of it, on the employer side, there are a lot of impacts too. And we should be really working with, I think, employers as well to raise awareness on these issues. Thanks a lot again for this really interesting research and sharing it with us. I see a lot of questions, but maybe we can hear Bethel first, and then we'll come back to the questions. Bethel, are you ready? I'm going to share my screen again. Yes. I see you. Okay, perfect.
Can
Floor is yours.
Yes. So thank you for this opportunity to share the findings that I got from the study that I did recently. The purpose of this was to just go back to the previous slide. Yes. Yeah. So the main purpose of my study was to investigate the temporal distribution of heatwave events for the last 30 years. That's between 1990 and 2020. And to try and see whether there's a connection between these heat events, the intensity and the duration and the human health. And of course, I did this. I am a lecturer at the Department of Earth and Climate Sciences, at the Faculty of Science and Technology here at the University of Nairobi. And I am a physical and environmental meteorologist with very specific research interest in the link between weather, climate, air pollution, and human health, and more so how that linkage evolves in the advent of climate change. Next slide. Yes, this study was done within 3 select counties in Kenya. For those of us who may not know, Kenya is an East African country, which is the greater horn of Africa, bordered by Ethiopia to the north, Uganda to the west, and Tanzania to the south. And these 3 counties were Nairobi, which is comparatively urban, Tana River County, which is comparatively coastal lowland, and Turkana County, which is comparatively ASAP. So in the map that is given on your right, the bounding boxes are shown. The red is Nairobi, which is at the central part of the country, and that is the capital city. Tana River is closer to the coastal part of the country and is a coastal lowland. And your northwestmost part of the country is the Turkana, which is comparatively arid and semi-arid. So as we know, Kenya is a tropical country that is nearly bisected by the geographic equator. We have a bimodal rainfall distribution, 2 rainfall peaks in March, April, May, and October, November, December. And in between, we have transition seasons. We are generally a warm country through the year because, of course, of the apparent shift of the overhead sun. But of course, the warmest is in December, January, February, which is the current season we are in now. And the June, July, August is the wettest or the coldest. And the weather of our country is predominantly driven by the tropical convergence zone. And that's why we have 2 rainfall seasons. I've overlaid that map with the current 7-day forecast of maximum temperature, and you see the north and the northeastern part is the most arid part of the country, and the central and the western part is a bit colder. Next slide. Yes, I relied on both daily observed and satellite maximum temperature for the 3 counties. I also employed heat wave magnitude index daily as a measure of heat wave events. I deployed Pearson correlation between the duration and the intensity of those heat waves and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which are sourced from the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation from the University of Washington. And although, of course, the intention was to get data for a very small possible unit, especially the specific health facilities, data confidentiality and insufficiency, especially for the health data, like has been mentioned by some colleagues here, is a challenge. So this, you have to really go through a lot of review and approval. So lucky enough, we just pulled counts of prevalence and deaths from the hospitals, and therefore we really didn't need to get an informed consent or a research permit. But we got data for those specific health facilities to represent the counties. And of course, they are aggregated along the county, and we just use maximum temperature because that is the main risk factor to this. Next slide. Yes, so the findings, the first was the heat wave starting dates and duration, and what you have on your screen are the specific start dates and duration for the different heatwave events that were identified in the 3 counties. Generally, we see that heat waves have occurred in Kenya from normal to those that are very extreme, especially the one that occurred in Turkana, which is intensity 9, which is very extreme in 2005. We see the longest periods over which no single heat wave event was observed between 1993 and 96, 2017 and 2020. We, of course, don't see any statistically significant trend in both using Mann-Kendall tests. We also observe that the longest heat wave events have occurred in 2012, 1991, 2005. And that is a 9-day heat wave, a 6-day, and a 7-day over Nairobi, Tana River, and Turkana. And based on this studying date, most heat wave events are observed to begin up and about February, March, which is essentially the month before we get our long rains. So we see the start date for most of these heat wave events occurring around March or February there, with an exception of only one event that is moderate that occurred in Turkana some time in the year. Next slide. Sorry if I'm moving too fast. I want to stick within the 10 minutes. Yeah, here we present analysis, results for the correlation analysis that we did between heatwave duration, heatwave intensity, and the prevalence and death associated with the chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Generally, we see, of course, a relation between the heatwave magnitude and duration, because essentially, the more intense and the more lengthy or the more prolonged the event will be. The duration of the heat wave is statistically dependent on the magnitude, which is to be expected. And on the other hand, we also see mortality as a result of COPD to be statistically related with prevalence, because of course the mortalities will be a direct translation of the morbidities. So that is what we see. And so we see some statistical relationship between the duration and the intensity and the prevalence and the deaths, and that is to be expected. Next slide. Yeah, before we performed a generalized linear model between the heat wave characteristics and the chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, we first of all needed to test the linearity between these variables. And what we see here is different degrees of linearity between heat wave characteristics and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease in different counties. On top you have Nairobi, in the mid you have Tana River, and below you have Turkana. We see a somewhat inverse relationship in Turkana, and studies have explained this to acclimatization, or the fact that you have microclimates that are within those different specific areas, and the microclimates may explain what we see here. For example, in urban areas, you may actually report an inverse relationship between heat wave characteristics and prevalence and deaths of diseases. Yet that really speaks to the fact that people have adapted to these events, and they spend much time indoor, and within these indoor environments, they have AC, and of course, they regulate how long they spend in the field. But if you go to extreme counties, people have to spend out because that's their source of livelihood. They have to be out for them to eat. So we see difference in the impacts of the risk because of the human behavior and acclimatization for the microclimate. Next. Yeah, once we confirmed the linearity between heat wave characteristics and the prevalence and deaths due to COPD, we applied the generalized linear model to see the percent risk in prevalence and death. And we observed that the risk of COPD, prevalence, and deaths show different degrees of linearity in the 3 counties. The prevalence varies at different levels, like we mentioned in the GAM analysis. But largely, we see a 0.76% increase in the prevalence of COPD with an increase in the duration of a heat wave. So if a heat wave is prolonged by a single day, that can translate to a 0.76 risk of morbidity associated with the COPD. We have a 0.03% risk increase due to a prolonged heat wave duration by a single day. And of course, we've mentioned that just has been reported by other studies, this low statistical significance may not really speak to the absence of the heat wave events, but rather it speaks to the way people have adapted to this and how long they spend outdoor, what is the kind of occupation, and such kind of socioeconomic factors, risk factors that were not collected. Next. I believe the last. We derive a number of recommendations from this. For the scientific community, we believe that in order to establish a cause effect, you must rely on a cause-specific morbidity and mortality, not just lumping together all the COPDs. And therefore, going forward, we will need to study and establish the role of other comorbidities. For humanitarian work, we see observed seasonality in the occurrence of heatwave events, and this points to the need to have accurate and timely seasonal forecast of maximum temperature and other triggers like the wind and humidity. And this forecast, again, can be deployed to manage extremely hot and humid days with the understanding that there is no better way to avoid a COPD flare-up other than to stay indoor. We've also seen and reviewed studies that are linking air pollution to this relationship, and therefore it's also good for the humanitarian work to look into that. And of course, in extreme cases, we've seen families and communities move to more cooler places because depending on their pre-existing medical condition, heat waves can actually translate to mortalities, and therefore human behavior is very critical. I believe this is the last, and so thank you so much for the fund, and thank you for the platform to share my research findings, and hope to hear from you more. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Betwa. This was really super interesting. Thank you for really pointing out that there's still persistent and huge challenges in the availability, reliability, and granularity of the data, especially local data on specific context, specific for specific groups, population groups. We still have these huge challenges. And thanks for, I hope the studies like you and yours will contribute to this kind of knowledge and draw attention to the risks. So thanks again. I'm gonna check if there are any, I see there's a lot of questions actually. We have about 10 minutes left. So I'm gonna see and direct the questions to the relevant presenters. Okay, the first question is for you, Tim. Can you read the question in the chat, or should I read it? Okay, if you read it, please go ahead answering.
So this is from Frido, and he's asking about how do cool roofs interact with solar panels that are mostly black and absorptive, and what about traditional tiled and angled roofs? So yeah, while solar panels are a little bit darker, they are still quite reflective in compared to a lot of darker roofs, but they also act as a bit of a separate layer to the roof. So while they themselves may absorb heat, they aren't actually transferring that to the actual roof. Yeah, and in terms of traditional tiled and angled roofs, so most clay kind of tiled roofs are pretty energy efficient actually. Just a bit of a thicker layer, and heat can't just kind of be transferred through to the actual building. But in a South African context, most of the areas we're looking at are more lower income, and they're not going to be able to afford tiled roof or expensive roofing materials. So you're mostly looking at more simple methods. So just changing reflectance of the actual roof by painting it or putting a coating on it, or using more simple metal roofing. And again, those are mostly flat roofs. So it's a little bit different to the angled roofs. So the second part of the question was looking at trees and cooling, and asking if it's only for tall trees, also for shrubs and bushes, and what height does a tree or shrub need to have an effective impact on cooling. And in terms of that, so obviously the shading aspect is going to be affected by the height. If you've got you've got a low tree, it's not going to provide any shade to people or houses. In terms of the evapotranspirative side of things, that's going to happen either way. But the bigger the tree, the more water it's going to release, and the more of an effect it's going to have there. So yeah, one of the other aspects there is actually trees tend to have a slightly darker, slightly higher albedo, or sorry, lower albedo, darker color, so that actually increases the absorption of sunlight a little bit. So above the canopy, it can actually be a bit warmer. So yeah, I don't know the exact heights and whatever, but I'd say you'd normally want it above the height of people and buildings would be the most effective, which in like single level housing, which most of Africa is, it's relatively effective. Yeah.
Thank you, Tim. The next question is, I'm moving forward fast because we don't have that much time left, but Dragan, could you see the question in the chat, or do you want me to read it? If you could, please go ahead and answer it.
Okay. I saw it. So I'll be short. It's a good question. So what could practically be done by the Red Cross in the field, so in Serbia, regarding heat and morbidity? So actually, I think there is much to do, especially in Serbia. I noticed that the Red Cross Society here, of course, it's more about blood donation, so pandemic and smoking problems and so on. But related to heat health issues, there are not. I didn't see any big events or awareness raising events in Serbia about this topic. So I think in this regard, there is the potential to have some heat action days, heat safety days. Also during the heat waves, to be there on the field, like with maybe some cooling devices, water, promotional material, connect with the water company maybe in the cities where the heat wave is expected. And even maybe before the summer season, it would be good if Red Cross could go to these groups that are more affected, like in the kindergartens, in the schools before the summer, to talk about the heat, the prevention of heat, also maybe in the care homes for older population. So in this regard, in this region where Serbia is located, heat is really a silent killer, and still not many actions are there. So I could have a number of recommendations. This is just a few that I mentioned. And I will also send this to Fried over email because I think he left already.
Oh, that's a pity, definitely. And I also see that there's a question about will the research reports be shared. They're already on the website, preparecenter.org, and I believe there is a link in the GHIN website to this research as well. Please have a look for those of all of you actually, and especially for the one who asked the questions. So let me check what other questions are there. Okay. Oh, there's a lot. I hope we will have a chance to. There is a question, but I'm not sure who that's addressing. Okay. There's another question for you, Farzana. Could you see it from Frido also? But did Frido left? Did you say Dragan? I think that's what you said, right?
Yeah, he mentioned that he will leave. Yeah, I'm not sure, but
it's a good question, and we are recording it. So still, Farzana, if you could answer it, that would be in the files. That's a good question. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So his first question is, are there any good practical examples of actions or adjustment to factory buildings to lower heat stress for workers, and like reflective roofs, such as mentioned by Timothy? So like the fact I have, this is like a small just explorative study and qualitative study, and I just selected 2 garment factories. Among those 2, no, but like I for the another part of my PhD study, yes, I'm doing now, and for selecting my factories for my quantitative part, I visited such factory, like they are using white roofs. And for this study, I must say that from the qualitative data, the key informant interviews, few of them mention about these interventions. While I asked them about these interventions like white roofs, green roofs, which are like informants are aware about that, but they are not sure about the expense and comfortability and differences. But they are aware about it and they are interested. So yes, there must be potential. These are the potential areas for future research in the country like Bangladesh, I must say. And some are like doing like these are, they say that these are feasible for the new factories, but it will be really difficult to change the design phase for the existing factories. And these are the perception from the key informants. And his other question is there any evidence that shows the economic impact of lowering heat stress on the productivity of factories, especially offset against the cost of such adjustment? And if so, has this been presented, tested with the RMG factory owners? So I want to share another challenge during conducting my research. Initially, I had I had decided to see their plan to see their productivity data, which I cannot get access from the factories. Those are really confidential for the ready-made garment factories in Dhaka, and so I just have their perception. So all the key informants and the workers, they just stated yes, there is association between health and productivity. So during summer, more illness, more absenteeism, more rest breaks, and they want to take rest. So in their from their perspective, there is of course economic relation between productivity and heat. But the cause, yes, for the from the key informant interviews, I found that they are really interested to make the such adjustment, as they are thinking that yes, heat has impact on productivity. So their perception
That's really,
is
really good. Thanks, Farzan. I think this is a really strong message to take to employers as well. I think this and small businesses that we are trying to work, especially addressing heat risk. Many of them are not just working in factories as all employers, but also outdoor workers, which we will hear in the coming webinars from our other researchers who focused on outdoor workers. I think that's going to be really interesting too. We are a little bit over time, but there are two questions for Betal, but I think you answered one of them. But the second question is really, really important because it's something we are also trying to clarify: vulnerability factors. Could you please talk a little bit about which vulnerability factors you take into account? Betal, over to you.
Yes, thank you. I had tried to respond to this on the chat, but like you mentioned, it would be good to see the vulnerability of the community. And just like I mentioned, in the input into the index is just the maximum temperature. And I agree, it would be good to overlay this with the number of other vulnerability factors, which was not done in this study. But I agree, this would be a good addition going forward, so that we understand, for example, the vulnerability between different people, those in an urban setup, those in an asal setup, those in a coastal setup, and that kind of stuff. I've also had a question from John regarding
Did we lose Betal?
how that works out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are so many interesting questions. I have time, I can continue. Maybe some people will drop, but I also see very interesting notes and some links to interesting studies. Please check those out in the chat. There's one interesting question that is kind of addressing all of the researchers, so feel free to chime in, which is how the health community could contribute to preventing health impacts of it. Maybe Dragan, you can go first. Those messages to the health community, in a way. What would be your
sorry,
messages?
I was losing this. Can you just repeat the question?
There's a question about like how the health community, health practitioners can contribute preventing these impacts of heat. So maybe we can consider as messages to the health community.
Yeah, definitely. They are important part of the puzzle, how to resolve this. So in this regard, one of the things that I could recommend, I'm part of one project where we are developing curricula and vocational training and online materials for students of medicine and the doctors that are already working in the field related to the climate impacts on health. So it's not just temperature, but also there is different types of viruses that will spread and so on. So in this regard, I think that, for example, I know plenty of colleagues from medicine here in Serbia. They are not so familiar with this climate impacts on health, like extreme temperature and so on. So they have the basics, but not enough knowledge. So in this regard, I think they should be, especially the new generations and already active doctors, they should cooperate with climate people and other experts, and we should provide them enough materials so they can provide better service to the citizens. So I think in this regard, there is a lot of things that they still need to learn related to climate health impacts.
Thanks. And as a note, also, I would like to mention that as Red Cross, Red Crescent, we have a global first aid center, and just the first aid part of it, and extreme heat response, immediate response, how to prevent it, how to prepare, and how to respond in the emergency. All the information is there, and many countries have this app contextualized in their own languages. So please maybe have a look at those too. I'm going to put the chat in the chat as well. Have a look. Anyone who would like to add any comment on that from the presenters before we close? Okay. All right, there's still a lot of questions, but I don't want to take everyone's time. And please check the link that I put in the chat, both links, the Prepare Center Health Research link and also the First Aid link. You could find some interesting information. And there are also links to other studies and case studies. Thank you so much, the researchers, presenters, and also all the participants for joining us today. I will be sharing the information and invitation for the next webinar soon. Please check us out on LinkedIn, Global Disaster Preparedness Center, or I also personally announce it. Thank you again and hope to see you next time.